And we will start with roll call.
All right, Commissioner Beach, Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Harnden.
Here.
Commissioner Harris.
Here.
Commissioner Lehman.
Here.
Commissioner McPherson. Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Norton.
Here.
Commissioner Perosa.
Here.
Chair Solomon.
Here.
And Rep Lewis. I think I saw him sign on.
Yeah, I thought I saw him sign on too.
There he is.
I'm here.
And last but not least, Commissioner Przonski.
All right. Well, I think that gives us quorum. So let's go ahead and get started. I don't believe anybody has signed up for public comment.
Nope.
Anybody wanting to give public comment? All right. We will move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the deflection funding for tribal governments. And Casey, I believe you're going to walk us through that.
Indeed. Is everyone seeing a PowerPoint presentation, hopefully? Thanks
Yep.
for the confirmation. All right. Get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Casey Beck, and I'm the CJC's Behavioral Health Program Manager and Tribal Liaison. Today, our ask is for the Commission to review and determine whether or not to approve the 2025 to 2027 Behavioral Health Deflection Formula funding for tribal governments. Back in July of 2025, this commission approved the set-aside amount of $2,618,920 for Oregon's federally recognized tribal governments for use in the 25-27 biennium. That particular amount of funding, you may recall, contemplated the 6 existing tribal grant recipients extending their BHD project periods and maintaining their current service levels for an additional year and 2 months through August 31st of 2027, which aligns well with the end of the county BHD project period. And it also included estimates for the 3 tribal governments that previously opted out to now access their formula funding portion for the remaining year in that grant cycle. So today, I'm going to present this funding table and give you a little background context. In April of this year, we sent out a Dear Tribal Leader letter to Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribal governments. And in that letter, we invited consultation and solicited input on the proposed funding formula, as well as the development of the 25-27 BHD solicitation for tribal governments. We also requested that tribes indicate whether or not they would opt in to apply for the available funding. And that helps us determine, what amount we are dividing the total available funding by. This letter was additionally shared with existing BHD grantees to provide an opportunity for tribal program staff, like the folks that are actually doing the work, to ask questions and provide input to the CJC on these proposals. As part of this process, we did not receive any requests for that formal leader-to-leader consultation, but staff did meet with a couple of existing grantees, as well as potential new applicants, to hear input and answer any relevant questions. The fabulous news I have to share with you all is that 8 of Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribal governments have opted in for this 25-27 BHD funding. This includes all 6 current grantees who are returning to apply, and 2 new tribal government applicants, the Coquille Indian Tribe and the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians. So as proposed, the proportion of funding available to each participating tribal government, so the 8 total tribes, was determined first by establishing that base allocation of $150,000. and then allocating any remaining funds using that previous funding formula that is based on the most recent Indian Health Services user population data that was available, which is actually from the year 2024. Those amounts are displayed on the screen here. And I'm sure you see where this is going, but my next question for you all is related to action. It is staff recommendation to approve the funding table, and I have proposed motion language here, but I'm happy to hang out on the previous slide if I have any, questions or a discussion from commissioners.
Great, thank you, Casey. Questions, comments? All right.
This is Commissioner,
Hearing-
real
go-
quick, sorry, just.
Yeah,
this is
go ahead.
Commissioner Harris. Hi, Casey. I was just curious if there was some special outreach or additional efforts that went into sort of generating this more robust application process that we could learn from, that helped, get the word out better this go around.
Yeah, Commissioner Harris, thank you so much for your question. I was a little quiet there at the beginning, so I just want to restate and make sure I have it correctly. The question is just whether, there were certain things that we learned from this process in terms of additional outreach that staff may have conducted, or, opening discussion. Is that correct?
Yeah, just what kind of, if there's any insight as to what led to more of a robust application process this time that got us, so many more applications.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Understood. Yeah. So first, quick clarification that the survey results were particularly for opting in to apply. So the application remains, and I'll have some exact updates on what that process entails in the coming slides. But as far as, what led to this additional input and also this additional interest from tribes, I think that we, hosted I think a main contributor is that we hosted a tribal summit back in January, in which we had a really great opportunity to connect in person with the 6 existing tribal grantees and to just create space to ask questions and workshop, problem solve, express concerns, talk about barriers. And that, I think, was not only a great opportunity to network with other tribes that, are planning and, piloting and starting up programs, but I think it gave some of the folks who were still very much in planning mode a little bit more confidence to, keep on the path and continue to aim for, starting up an operational program by January 1st of 2027. The 3 tribes that had previously not opted in, we just, made it a top priority to reach out to everyone directly and say, hey, there's another opportunity to do so. It can be specifically to take time to plan for a deflection program. A new applicant that's opting in for the very first time is not going to be expected to stand up a program in the next 6 months. So really kind of treating it like another opportunity for a planning grant. And I think something that really benefited us was opening up the opportunity to ask questions, provide input to program staff. So it's not necessarily a big C versus little c consultation of formal consultation versus informal consultation. It more was just an open invitation for anyone who had questions, be you, a person on the line providing these services to participants, or maybe an administrator or, the behavioral health supervisor for the tribal government. Just kind of an open invitation to reach out to staff, to ask those questions, to, take meetings, and we did. And I think that folks really were encouraged to, give it a shot based on the progress that's been made so far from the 6 current tribal grantees.
That's great. Now it sounds like the extra work really paid off. Nice job.
And
Thanks.
Casey, who were the 2 new applicants?
Yes, the Coquel Indian Tribe
Uh-huh.
and the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians.
Okay.
So
Great.
the one remaining, the one tribe that is not yet ready or interested to opt in is the Burns Paiute tribe.
Uh-huh. And do we know if any of these applicants are partnering with counties at all?
Yeah, so I would say that the term partnership there may be a little like tricky to define, but definitely collaborating. There are county programs that are operating in some parts of the tribal jurisdiction,
Right.
but many of these tribes do, expand beyond just one county colonial defined boundary, and so there, I would say, is definitely an interest from the two tribes that I've heard to collaborate with the existing programs to learn what's going on, to maybe establish workflows of referrals, to get those tribal members to the services that are made available to them that are, culturally appropriate. And I do think, though, that there is no explicit requirement or expectation that those tribal governments go meet with each county that's in their jurisdiction to establish some sort of partnership. So that's not an expectation at this time, although we, of course, strongly encourage collaboration and discussion where appropriate.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right, do you have some motion language for us, Casey?
Indeed.
All right, is there someone willing to make a motion to approve the 25-27 BHD funding table for participating tribal governments?
Commissioner Harden, I'll make such motion.
Is there a second?
I'll
Commissioner Lee.
second. Oh,
Okay, I think Commissioner Perosa got there as the second. So we have a motion made by Commissioner Harden, seconded by Commissioner Perosa. Roll call, please, Jenny.
Commissioner Beach, Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Harden,
Yes.
Commissioner Harris,
Yes.
Commissioner Lehman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson, Commissioner Norton,
Abstain due to my relationship with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz.
Commissioner Perosa,
yes.
and Chair Solomon.
Yes.
And that does pass with 5 votes.
Okay. Okay, great. Super. Thank you.
Paul, if you don't mind, I have a quick update for everyone.
Yep.
Okay. So process timeline, wanted to make sure everyone has an update on where we're at, including any of the tribal governments that are tuning into this call to have an understanding of where we go next now that we have an approved funding table. So first and foremost, we want to orient you to where you're at in the timeline. Today, June 2nd, we're at that third orange commission meeting block to the left of the middle, indicated by the arrow. The project period for existing grantees is set to end at the end of this month. Can't believe it's June, but it would be June 30th that the project period ends. But we have sent out amendments to the current grant agreements that would extend the project period through September 30th of this year, 2026, to allow for some dedicated time to apply for this, next available funds. And that way we're not, navigating a closeout process in the middle of a new application process. And this will allow folks to continue to spend the available or the money that they have currently. So the current project period you see kind of like ends at the middle, the current project end indicated by that dark gray box and the dark gray line. The extended project period is the green line that extends beyond that through the ends of September. Now that this funding table has been approved, the CJC anticipates a 45-day application period, with the solicitation set to open June 15th through July 30th of 2026. As per usual, applications must be submitted online through CJC's grant management system, SM Apply. But I would love to paint a quick picture of the solicitation so that folks have an idea of what to expect. So for new applicants, those 2 new applicants who have not previously received a BHD grant, we are soliciting responses to all application questions, through which these applicants will note their plans, any identified partners or collaborators, workflows, etc. And then applicants will also be required to submit a budget projection sheet in which the grand total must not exceed, but may be less than that applicant's respective total allocation as indicated in that funding table that was approved. For returning applicants, we really tried to make this as simple as possible. And we received some great input from the existing grantees of how to make the solicitation process better. So for the returning applicants who previously received a BHD grant, our 6 current grantees, we're requesting responses to all application questions, through which applicants provide details about their programs, including referral pathways, operational workflows, criteria of participation, eligibility, exclusion, and success. And of note, as I mentioned earlier, returning applicants will be expected to turn operational no later than January 1st of 2027. 3 of the 6 programs are already piloting. So we're, I would say ready to commit to that in about a half a year or so. But we will also be soliciting an updated expense tracker from returning applicants. So quarterly, these BHD grantees are submitting updates to their expense trackers and basically detailing what they expended their funding on in the previous quarter. So it's kind of adding that in to this process instead of requesting a separate process. And folks will just be expected to report what previously expended funds they did for this last quarter, which means that included in this tracker would be all previously expended funds for the entire project period to date, which is April 1st of 2025 through June 30th of 2026. And then as part of this tracker, they'll have an opportunity to complete this budget projection page, in which the amount of funding that is added to an applicant's previous 23-25 award must not exceed, but may be less than that applicant's respective allocation as detailed in that formula funding table. So trying to speak in plain language here, if an applicant received an award that previously in the 23-25 biennium of $150,000, that base amount, and their 25-27 allocation is $150,000, that base amount again, their total budget projection must fall between $150,000 and $300,000. So obviously we're not going to be taking money away from what was already given. And should they decide that they do not need a full $150,000 more, they're welcome to ask for less than that. It is our recommendation that applicants ask for what they need to operate during this 14-month project period, July 1st of 2026 through August 31st of 2027, being mindful that any funds that are not expended by the end of that project period will be returned to the CJC. So I want to pause quickly just to ask if there are any questions or feedback from commissioners as it relates to this solicitation content. Seeing some shaking heads. So I'll just do a quick recap. The solicitation opens June 15th, 2026. Applications are due by 11:59 p.m. on July 30th, 2026. And then last but not least, I want to draw your attention to that orange box with the border at the far right of the timeline. This commission will convene on September 1st, 2026 to review the 25-27 BHD applications received from these tribal governments and make any relevant award decisions. Our goal is to send amendments and new contracts for those new folks out for signature by the end of September, represented by that pink box at the far right. Great. Any other questions or comments for me?
I think we're good. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation. All right, I think Will is up next to talk to us about the new dashboard update with the illegal marijuana program.
Chair Solomon, nearly there. I am here
Okay.
to provide an update about the Behavioral Health Deflection Programs dashboard, and I believe Rima may be discussing that. Yeah, I am
Okay,
in
got
EGP
it. I
dashboard.
see there are two of them. Yep, got it.
Of course. So bear with me just one moment. Chair Solomon, thank you for the opportunity. And commissioners, for the record, my name is William Ash Halchin. I'm a senior research analyst here at the Criminal Justice Commission, and I am pulling up, you should be seeing a view of a web browser that shows the homepage of the dashboard. Anybody seeing that?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair Solomon. And so I do have the pleasure this afternoon of sharing some updates to this behavioral health programs deflection dashboard. And this is a dashboard that I'm sure that many of you have seen in the past. However, my goal here is to really focus in on those updates. I want to remind everyone, however, that at any point you may access any of CJC's dashboards if you are on the CJC website. Next to Oregon.gov, which is in the top left of your screen as you navigate the website, there is in that light blue bar, the link that you can click on for dashboards, which will take you to an interim page where you again click on the blue button that will take you directly to all of CJC's visualization dashboards here. And then once you click on the behavioral health programs, deflection programs dashboard, it will take you to this home screen. We will not spend a lot of time today on some of these tabs within this dashboard. For example, this home that you see here, the most important thing to take away from this, commissioners, is the last update date. We get data from our partners at the Oregon Health and Science University, Portland State University School of Public Health monthly, generally in the second half of the month. And this dashboard is updated monthly. So I do want to very briefly draw your attention to the About tab. We will not go in over this in significant detail. It does have some helpful background information relating to House Bill 4002 as well as the deflection grant program overall. It also provides some brief descriptions of the contents of 3 of the pages and provides some helpful acronyms, should those be of help as you are navigating the dashboard. There is one other thing that I do want to draw your attention to that I won't click on this time, but that is a link on the far right side here where my cursor is that will take you to the PCS dashboard. These are different. So the programs dashboard really focuses on those deflection programs, whereas the broader changes to the criminal legal system, for example, in arrests, cases filed, and those admissions to DOC can be found on that PCS dashboard. So just making sure there are no questions before we dive in detail. Okay. So the next tab that I want to draw your attention to is the Participants tab. Once you click on this, you'll see something titled Deflection Progression, which is anticipating or contemplating showing how folks move through deflection programs. You'll notice here this blue line here, and if at any point you have a question about a definition of something, nearly every item in this dashboard has hover tips. So if something is unclear, most often hovering over that item or items can provide at least some definition, and staff would be glad to provide additional definition should there continue to be questions. But I do want to draw your attention to the fact that there are just under 4,000 deflection events that have been recorded in the statewide database to date. And once we click on these bars, which we will do as we proceed through the page, additional contextual information is shown to the right. And so here for this broadest line that looks specifically at the number or count of deflection events, we see information related to that sort of front end, which is the referral pathways, as well as the handoff type. And this is statewide. And so what we see here is that the lion's share of the referral pathways across the state are for officer intervention, which we see, of course, here with this more than 3,000 of those events. And as we proceed down to the handoff type, the most common one that we see is a warm handoff at a deflection drop-off center. Although those warm handoffs on scene, as well as instructions to report to the deflection team, are notable in the second and third position. And then it works both ways. You can either unclick this bar, or you can simply click the very next bar and that your view will change accordingly. So as we move from the total number of events to those events where the potential participant was deemed to be eligible by program staff, we see additional and different information than the previous step. So clicking on the eligible bar will show us the reasons why folks were not eligible. More than one reason may apply in some of these items, and we've demarcated that when relevant. But most commonly, when folks have been determined to be ineligible, it is related to not attending a court appearance, a prior disqualifying conviction, or another on this list. And again, more than one of these may be relevant for a particular participant. And as we move down, again, sort of one way that we've seen that folks may or may not be deemed eligible to enroll in a deflection program is relating to the charges that the individual had or was associated with that specific deflection event. And again, we see very commonly PCS only. There are some pathways that do not require a criminal charge. And so it would make sense for us to see no charges at entry in some cases. And then the remainder are sort of arrayed with violations, felonies, and misdemeanors and permutations of those with possession of a controlled substance. Just to move down to the next bar, right? So we started with a total number of events and then the folks who were eligible, and then we move into the folks who elected to enter a program. There are a couple of things that we look at this stage, including substance use and mental health disorders. But I do want to draw your attention to this type of housing or shelter when entering deflection. So, of course, we have over 1,500 of these events where the individual was unsheltered or residing in a homeless shelter. And this is an item that is paired. So for those folks in the next line that we'll look at, those who've successfully completed a program, this question is asked again to sort of be able to produce a pre and post participation look at housing.
Will, I've got a question about that.
Of course, sir.
When I look at these numbers, I see 385 out of 2,500 people have what I'd call stable housing, roughly 15%. So the vast majority are either homeless or in some other less stable type of housing. Do we know, I mean, is there an easy way to look at housing that's being provided at the county level and how much housing is being offered or built into the budgets of the county programs?
Chair Solomon, thank you so much for your question. There are a limited number of views that we can sort of see this housing at work, and you absolutely correctly identified one of those, which is the budget tab, which we will look at shortly. And indeed, it does have the capacity to like click a category of housing and see the sort of total allocations associated with each line item across the state for those programs. So that is one view of that. We can also look at the sort of proportion or potentially or ratio of folks within specific programs that are receiving like a housing service is another way that we could look at that. And so depending on the specific question, whether it's more overall or like the funding and then what folks are getting for that funding, we do have some capacity to answer that question, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course. This is a great time for any other questions. If anybody has them, you can always interrupt me. Okay. Not seeing anybody. Okay. So I will unclick the entered bar here. And what I do want to mention is that these 4 that we have remaining, completed, currently enrolled, and then the 2 incompletes, This is really trying to show what happens or what could happen once someone has entered a program. They may successfully complete it. They may be unsuccessful in their attempt. And when they are unsuccessful, we have further bifurcated that, and we'll click through these together into whether that participant did or did not receive sort of an assessment or any service, some type of engagement with that program. And then we do still see those 487 folks who are still currently enrolled in their deflection program. So just clicking through here on completed, we see a couple of, scroll up just for a moment, thank you. We see a couple of different contextual data views here. We can see the program criteria that were satisfied by participants to successfully complete their program. Again, this is another one of those items where more than one may be selected, and very commonly we see that more than one item may be selected for participants. And just to illustrate that point more, as I scroll down in this smaller window, we still see substantial counts. So it is the permutations of these that can also be important. And as I promised earlier, that housing item, that living arrangements item, is found not just when folks enter, but it is also asked again of those who successfully complete programs, so that we can see any differences, Paul. And so that may also get back to your question. We are measuring sort of pre and post for those participants to also see shifts or changes in their living arrangements post participation.
Great.
So for those participants who are currently enrolled, when we click on them, we get additional detail about the type of substance use disorder. Most commonly, what we see in the data is methamphetamine and fentanyl. Again, this more than one may be selected for the participant. And then we also see in this contextual view, the assessments or screenings that were received by participants. And so again, we see high counts here. So folks are in many cases receiving at least one or more than one of these assessments or screenings.
So
just-
I'm curious about that currently enrolled number.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I didn't look at all the counties, but like when I looked at Lane County, there are 100 people currently enrolled, and 487 statewide feels like a low number.
Hey, Paul, I would be glad to look into that a little more carefully. These data we received just like a week or so ago from our partners at OHSU. And so I'm glad to look into that number more carefully, and I can provide a written response, for example, looking at that.
Great, thanks. And it looks like you have another question from Commissioner Miller.
Yes, Commissioner Miller.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. This is fascinating with these updates. I'm curious about whether you can drill through to particular jurisdictions here. I was looking at the eligibility piece that you talked about, and not attending court appearance was the top reason for ineligibility determination. And I'm curious if there's a way to look at that based on the jurisdiction.
Commissioner Miller, yes, there is a way for us to look at that. It may not be quite as robust of a view as you are hopeful for, but we can definitely see in the next tab, in the county programs tab, at the programmatic level, like which have specific requirements. And then some of these counts, for example, or the counts are drilled down to specifically that particular county that you may look at in the dashboard. And so I think that will provide at least some view of your question, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, of course. So y'all, we have just a couple of other items here. Again, these last two bars here are those who have unsuccessfully completed the program, but the difference in sort of which bar they go in is whether we see that they have engaged in a service, whether they have received a screening or assessment, or in some way engaged with that program. And so in those cases where we do see some engagement with a program, of course, we are looking at the reasons why that deflection was not complete. Most commonly, we see a failure to engage with a treatment plan, or that the individual participant was lost to follow-up and could no longer be contacted. We also see broad categories of service receipt among those who were incomplete but did receive an assessment or services, and that sub-treatment is the most common. Yes, Commissioner Lehman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm assuming because the counts don't add up that they can be in more than one of those reasons for incomplete.
Yes, Commissioner, that is absolutely correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir. And then the last bar here is relating to those participants who entered a program, did not complete, and there was no assessment or service provision that we can determine from the data. And so for those participants, this contextual view is showing sort of criminal justice status, if known, after they exit the program, as well as why referred services were not received. And by far, the most common indicated reason here is that the participant declined those services. In some cases, that loss to follow-up appears as well. The other counts, however, are lower. Are there any questions about this participants tab before we move to the county programs tab? Okay. Not seeing any, but we can always come back. So I am going to click on the county programs tab now, and we will wait for just a moment. The first thing that I want to draw your attention to is this part in the middle. Should look very familiar. It's what we looked at on the last slide. So if there is no county selected on this county programs page, it defaults to the statewide numbers. However, you will also notice beneath the map, beneath the visualizations, you will notice some areas where it says program details. So specific eligibility criteria and exclusion criteria and what is required to complete a respective program will populate in this area once we click on a county, as well as some contact details for that particular program. And so, y'all, this is always tricky to pick a county whenever you're doing a demonstration. So I'm just going to pick the county at the top left of the map this time, which is Clatsop County. So Clatsop County, once I click on it, you'll notice several things happened at once. The counts in our progression bars changed, and the values in that contextual data changed as well. And then what we see down here near the bottom is that contact information that I mentioned, specific for this county, eligibility criteria, exclusion criteria, and what is required to complete this program. You will also notice that we retain the same structure from the previous tab in the dashboard, but the counts reflect the county's efforts here. So whereas before we saw just under 4,000 of those deflection events, when we are able to drill down to a particular county, we can see their own specific flow for their participants. So here we see, for example, 88 events, of which 84 were eligible and of which 74 entered. And then with those remaining 4 categories, we can see how those arrayed across complete and incomplete and currently enrolled. I do also want to point out one final thing on this view of the dashboard, which is this contextual data over here. These are front end. And so we wanted to sort of keep these for now, rather than providing all of those same very drilled down views of things like behavioral health conditions, for example, because in many cases, counts are still low. In some rural and frontier programs, the counts are still pretty low. And so we wanted to be very careful about that re-identification risk. So before we move to the budget details tab, I just want to pause here and see if there are any questions about the county programs page that we've just been looking at. Okay, I'm seeing some shaking heads, no hands going up. Okay, we can always come back. So I will click on the budget details tab here. It may take just a moment. So if it has been some time since you've seen this view, the categories, these broad categories on the leftmost side of the screen here may have changed since the last time you saw them. So generally, what you see are expense categories relating to personnel, relating to client services, administration, and equipment and supplies. And then we're using a statewide view at this time. So we see the dollar amounts and percentages here. The dollar amounts are located here. The percentages are reflected in these sort of pie charts. And then for each of these 4 broader categories, there are subcategories available. So Paul, for your earlier question relating to housing, it is under client services. And so we will click on that momentarily. If nothing else is selected, what you can see here in this scroll box are the line items and dollar amounts for each program. And so it is a long list is what I will say, because it is aggregating all of those. However, if we were to click on housing, which we can see just under sort of 3 million of the total, it filters to only those items those line items that are related to housing, and it still retains the sort of identification. So you can see, for example, for each program, the dollar amount that is allocated towards housing, and then a bit more detail about what that means. In some cases, it may be short-term support. In other jurisdictions, it may be hotel vouchers. But that detail is available here on this budget details tab in the housing area. So just to unclick that and show you one last feature, which is that we can at any time take that more drilled down view of this by using this blue drop down and identifying a county. And I am going to select the same county here. And once I did choose this county level view, you'll notice things populated differently. So we see different percentages filled in the pie charts. We see different dollar amounts in the broad expense categories, and we see different amounts here in the line item types. And that, again, you can click these if you need to, but it is generally easier to get a better sense of the budget allocations with just one county versus scrolling the list of all of them. And there is a last updated date here. Because of the cadence at which CJC receives the amendment or budget adjustment request, we just want to make sure that we put that last updated date here as well. So commissioners, I'm glad to pause here in case there are any additional questions about anything that I've talked about today. We can go back to another tab if that's desired, or I'm glad to answer questions about any of this.
Well, I'll just say, Will, I appreciate the additional information that's provided. I think this dashboard is pretty dynamic and allows us to look at kind of numbers in the aggregate and drill down at a county level and by a whole range of different metrics. So good work.
I wish I could take all the credit, sir. This is several of my colleagues on the research side.
Pass on our thanks.
Will do, sir. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments for Will? All right. Anything else you want to add? Or are we
No, sir.
done with this? Okay, great. So I think now we will talk about the illegal marijuana market enforcement dashboard update. And I think Rima will walk us through that.
Good afternoon, Chair Solomon and commissioners. For the record, my name is Rima Lyons-Spite, and I'm the coordinator of the Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant Program. As Chair Solomon just mentioned, today it's my pleasure to share with you CJC's new dashboard for the Marijuana Grant Program. I'm going to share my screen like Will just did. We are looking at the live webpage again. So as we move through this presentation, I may just need an extra few seconds for loading and transitions. Go. So can everyone see the dashboard? Excellent. So here's the homepage for the dashboard, including the date the dashboard was last updated. This dashboard is generated by grantee reported data submitted to CJC each quarter as part of their quarterly reports. So we update the dashboard every quarter after we process that reporting, and the most recent data on grant-funded activities becomes available. So currently, the dashboard reflects data through the end of the last closed quarter as of March 31st, 2026. We do follow up with grantees for data corrections and issues throughout the year. So data presented here may not be final. Additionally, I do want to just point out before we get started, many of the marijuana incidents or cases are still ongoing when they're reported to us. So if you're looking for the most final, detailed, and complete data, that can be found in our annual legislatively mandated marijuana report we publish on the CJC publications page, January 1st of each year. This dashboard is really meant to be reflective of the live or the ongoing work that we're seeing from our grantees on a quarterly basis. I do also want to note before we get started that the dashboard is not meant to be a comprehensive presentation of all illegal marijuana activity in the state. It's a new dashboard, so we're going to be looking at each tab, and we're in the process of rolling it out to grantees. As you saw with the last presentation with Will, this is an iterative process, so we anticipate that we'll get feedback, we'll make changes, and the dashboard will be a living thing that continues to change based on how it's used. So let's go ahead and go to the About tab. So this About tab, similar to other dashboards, just gives a brief overview of SB 1544, the legislation that authorized this grant program, and describes what each tab includes. It also includes some definitions for common terms and acronyms used. So we're going to look at the funding tab next. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So the funding tab presents the jurisdiction, funding history, and contact information for each grantee. It's not as detailed as the funding tab for the BHD dashboard, but we'll go into what it does show. So the drop-down menu on the upper left-hand side allows you to select the funding cycle. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And this will obviously, change what you see in the other charts. Let's look more closely at the map. The map shows each funding by grantee jurisdiction. There are two types of grantees eligible to fund under the marijuana grant. So that's law enforcement agencies and community-based organizations, or CBOs. Law enforcement agency jurisdictions are these filled in gray areas on the map. And then the CBO grantee jurisdictions are the colored lines on the map. So let's go ahead and click on Jackson County and look at that information. As you can see here, the Jackson County is now selected. The contact information populates on the top right-hand side. And then in the chart on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a breakdown of the funding they have been awarded from the 2018-2019 funding cycle to the current funding cycle. If you click on that jurisdiction, it'll bring you back to the main map view. For the community-based agencies, as I mentioned, their jurisdiction is in a colored outline. So for example, if we click on this blue outline statewide, that's the information for CWRP, which is our consortium of 7 CBOs that we fund together. The CBO contact information populates below the map. So we have the primary contact of Oregon Law Center, one of the CBOs in that consortium down there. And then we can see the funding that they've been awarded since 2021 when CBOs became eligible for this grant program. Any questions or comments about this tab? All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next tab, incidents. Excuse me. Which I'll click on here. So the Incidents tab presents information submitted by our law enforcement grantees on law enforcement operations supported by the grant, which we call incidents. Data on this tab goes back to the 2023 reporting year, which reflects when some of the expansions to our incident reporting process were implemented. So the drop-down menu on the left side allows you to see or select a specific reporting year or select all. So let's go ahead and look at the view for all so we can look at the cumulative information from 2023 to 2026. It's important to note here that this date selection, again, is based on reporting year, not calendar year. There's a note above the dropdown in case you forget, but that roughly corresponds with our reporting year for our published annual report, which runs October 1st through September 30th. So if we were to select 2024, for example, that would be October 1st, 2023 through September 30th, 2024, and correspond with the reporting for that 2024 program year that was published January 1st of the following year. For the earlier years, 23 and 24, I do want to note that some of our data elements weren't completely populated. So for example, in this middle chart here, there's kind of a large percentage of NA, which reflects that later implementation of that specific data element. So if there's zeros or blanks or a large percentage of NA in that 2023 and 2024 period, when you're looking at it, that's the reason. So let's go ahead and go back to the all view again, and we'll get into each chart. So if you're not familiar with the IMMEGP program, you might be wondering what an incident is. An incident is a grant-funded law enforcement operation, and it can range from an individual law enforcement officer intercepting a parcel to a larger multi-agency team serving a warrant and eradicating an illegal marijuana grow. So this tab is really about grant-funded law enforcement operations and the types of situations they run into during those operations, such as how many law enforcement personnel are present, how many people they encounter on site, what kinds of environmental or other code violations they find, and how many firearms they confiscate during the incident. So looking at each chart individually, let's start with the map. So the map on this left side presents the number of incidents reported by those law enforcement grantees. The bolded number at the top presents the number of total incidents that they reported. The unbolded number underneath it looks at the number of incidents that were identified as being related to a drug trafficking organization at any point during the investigation. So if you click on a single jurisdiction, similar to the other page, the rest of the excuse me, charts, will modify just to show that jurisdiction's information, or you can look at all of them collectively. As you kind of see as I'm moving around, there is additional information if you hover over any of the data elements in any of the charts. For example, in this map, we see the same total incident count, the DTO related count. Then there's additional information on the number of people encountered on site. So this top number here is the total number of people they encountered during those incidents, and then the average number of people per incident that they encountered on site. I apologize, my throat is very dry this afternoon. So the next chart in the middle talks about how those incident investigations were started. As you can see here, in this example, the majority were started through investigation that the team was working on, the funded team was working on. Then another 18% came from tips from the public, etc. the chart directly next to that on the right provides a breakdown of personnel involved in each incident. And that's a total count of personnel across all incidents. So in this example, 1,465 personnel were involved in responding to those incidents. And those were the funded personnel. And then there was another 2,661 law enforcement personnel who could have been from that agency or other partner agencies assisting in the response who were not funded by marijuana funds. So that is very common to see. And what we also hear from our grantees is that they really, rely on the support from unfunded law enforcement personnel to assist with those incidents. The chart on the bottom middle presents the percent of incidents where law enforcement personnel observed different types of code violations, such as electric, water, or environmental code violations. Those code violations correspond to what we hear anecdotally from grantees about the environmental degradation. So that's like trash, water pollution, illegal water usage, unsafe building and wiring and structures, and a whole host of other issues that kind of arise from those illegal grows. And then the last chart on this page on the bottom right shows the percentage of incidents where firearms were seized, broken out by the number of firearms that were seized at each incident. As you can see in this chart, there were no firearms seized about 79% of the time, but then about 21% of the time, there was at least one firearm seized during the incident. And kind of alarmingly for 3% or about 27 incidents throughout the time period, 10 or more firearms were seized. Any questions or comments about this incident tab? No? All right. I'll go ahead and move on to the enforcement tab now. So I'll go ahead and click over there. So this tab is also generated with data from our law enforcement grantees, and it presents information on criminal justice actions that result from each incident, such as the number of people arrested and drug seizures. So data on this tab also goes back to the 2023 reporting year. So you can select the reporting year you'd like to look at with this first drop down on the left, and then there's an additional drop down since there isn't an interactive map on this tab. This additional drop down allows you to select a specific grantee. So we'll just look at all for the purposes of this demonstration. So the first chart on the top left side presents the actions that were taken against those people encountered on site that we saw when we hovered over the map. And for those folks, they could have been, referred to the DA for charges, arrested, cited, or had another criminal justice outcome. So that's broken out here. So if you hover over the bar, it tells you the number of people and the incidents that they're associated with. There is some overlap in those categories. So just bear that in mind when you're hovering over that information. The chart on the bottom left side shows property and currency seizures based on the reported value of each type of seizure. Like with the drug seizures we'll talk about next, the financial and property seizures, represent goods and money taken out of the illegal market, and that's one of the primary types of data we track to see how successful these incidents or operations are. So you can see the breakdown there, since or in 2025, the 2025 reporting year, we had $3.6 odd million seized across all the incidents. And another 2.5 million or 2.6 million in property also seized. The chart on the top right side talks about drug seizures. the first two columns of the top chart look at the total volume of marijuana seizures, including the number of marijuana plants seized and pounds of processed marijuana seized. For all the other drug seizures, so that's the edibles and BHOs shown in this table, and then the chart below it showing other types of drugs seized, we did a count of incidents where those items were present rather than the volume. So for many of those other drugs, the volume they are measured in tends to be very small. So it can be hard to gauge what the volume translates to in terms of, social health or criminal costs. So we thought it might be more helpful instead to present, the number of incidents where law enforcement seized those other drugs. So you can kind of see how frequently they're running into those other drugs when they're doing those marijuana enforcement incidents.
And Rima, what does BHO stand for?
Butane hash oil. So it's a
Oh, okay.
yeah.
You might want to list that in the acronyms on the about page,
Okay. Thank
because I
you for
didn't
that.
see any reference to it anywhere.
We can absolutely add that. So thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments about this tab? All right, in that case, I will click on survivors and we'll go ahead and look at this last tab. So similar to the other tabs, there's a drop down at the top. We'll just select all for purposes of this demonstration. First, I wanted to draw your attention to this sentence at the top. So similar to the charts, some of the data presented in the comments changes based on what, year or grantee selection you make. So here, looking across all years, we can see that CBOs reported they received 70 referrals from law enforcement. And then the remaining, or 1,970 survivors that they served through this program, they encountered through outreach and then engaged in the program. So I know that's a question we've gotten and looked into a lot previously of where how the survivors of those human trafficking situations are getting connected to the program. So we put that kind of front and center so folks could see that. So this tab, similar to the other tabs, is looking at quarterly reported data, but this is strictly from our CBO grantees. So that data is based on the services provided to the victims or survivors of human trafficking associated with those illegal marijuana grows. So for the first chart on the left, the top left here, we provide a breakdown of the different reasons survivors initially sought services from the CBO, such as a wage claim issue, which is not being paid, employer criminal conduct, such as violence or threats, seeking humanitarian aid, which includes several categories of basic necessities, such as housing, food, or clothing, or any of the other reasons listed. And we do have a longer definition for each of those categories that you can find if you hover over the bar. Directly below that, we have a breakdown of sort of broader categories of types of services that were actually provided to folks that engaged in the program, which are, legal services, humanitarian aid, referrals to other services, et cetera, with the vast majority being legal services. And similarly, if you hover over the chart, you'll see an expanded definition for that. On the right side, we provide a breakdown of the demographics for survivors that received services, including the race, ethnicity, gender, and age. I do want to point out here that this information is only for those folks that voluntarily provided it. On average, about 75% of survivors served by these programs do not provide this information. So it may not be, the data here may not be reflective of the broader population at large. But based on, the information we do have, the majority served are Hispanic, male, and between the ages of 18 and 35. So that's the last tab on the dashboard. I'll pause here in case there are any additional questions or comments.
It looks like Commissioner Freeman has his hand raised.
Sure.
So I apologize about being late. I'm traveling. I'm curious, and just, looking through my lens, when the drug team goes out and, has an interaction with an illegal drug operation where the cartel is running the operation, and the drug team takes and confiscates all the plants or grinds them in the ground or whatever. Oftentimes the people there just sort of run off, they just they don't get arrested. They just run off into the woods or into other properties or whatever. If those people seek legal services for wage claims, how do these organizations, the CBOs, how do they go after that? I mean, it seems to me like the organization that they're seeking to run the wage claim against is they're illegal. There's no way to get a hold of anybody. I'm just curious how that service in several of these categories, how that's even provided when, a traditional wage claim is against an employer that is a legal entity you can go after. I'm just curious how they're able to provide services and benefit them in some way.
I would be happy to follow up with you. I know that the CBO programs do have, specific criteria that they look at to accept those cases, and they do have ways to file against certain types of employers. I'm sure it is an issue if there are no records of any kind associated with them. But I'd be happy to get more information on that if you're interested in that, Commissioner Freeman.
The only reason I'm interested in, and again, I'm grateful that somebody's trying to seek out and help these people that have been trafficked, but if we're just giving money to an organization, there's literally nobody to go get, to help with. There might be a better mechanism to help people than to pay a CBO to try to chase a ghost. I mean, literally these cartel grows that I'm associated with, that we see in Douglas County, everybody's gone. I mean, they're in the wind. So I don't know how, I'm trying to think, from my business background, how you would go after an employer that was in the country illegal, doing an illegal operation, how you'd ever recover anything from them. So I just hope we're not, funding this and getting the data, from the CBOs if they're not able to recover something. So that's really my interest is, this is the number of wage claims. What's the recovery rate? How are they being successful, getting the employer to somehow pay the wages?
Yeah, and that's a great question. They do provide periodic data on the success of those legal claims that they make. They weren't part of the standard reporting metrics that we were originally looking at. So right now they're kind of providing them as updates on their individual goals and objectives, just because we fund, different types of CBOs. So they're not the standard, performance metrics that we look at across the board. But like I said, I'm happy to look into that further for you.
Thank you. The number one category is wage claim. I just was thinking that was interesting that maybe there is some way to get some of it back. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And it looks like you got another question from Chief Harnden.
Yeah, more of a comment to Commissioner Freeman's comment, because that surprised me too. But looking at some of our grow operations that have been taken down, a lot of their workers are lured into a business under the guise of regular and stable employment, and then yet they get siphoned off to work on the grow operations. We've seen that a couple times in some fairly significant grow operations in Lynn County. So I think that might be driving those numbers. We had a restaurant chain, for instance, that would lure in workers for the purpose of employment, but then divert that work out to illegal cultivation. So that might be what's driving that. Some context there.
Great, thank you. All right. More to present, Rima?
No, that's it. Just a final note. We are rolling this out to grantees. And like I said, these are always iterative, so we'll make changes based on what feedback we get, what folks are actually using the dashboard for. And we do have a more in-depth webinar on the dashboard with our grantees and any other interested parties scheduled for the 11th of June. So if any folks are interested, just let us know and we can share that invite with you.
Great, thank you. Nice work. All right, I think we are just about to the end of the agenda. I think, as I recall, I don't have it in front of me, we have agency updates from Interim Director Keck.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'll be pretty brief with you this afternoon. One, I want to just make a shout out to staff. You just saw some amazing dashboards, and just to imagine all the work behind that. Of course, there's the research analytics and there's the programmatic collection, but deciding what to put and to put it in some kind of translatable format like this, I just, kudos go out to them. I know you all appreciate that, but I wanted to say that out loud. In terms of the agency, beyond work like that, a couple updates for you. One is just a really kind of high level non-update. We are moving forward one legislative concept this upcoming biennium, and that is just to move the sentencing guideline changes through the legislative process. So we don't have any new concepts or any bills that will be pushing through the legislature, but we were approved to move forward with what tends to be our biennial rules bill. So you will hear from staff and the Sentencing Guidelines Committee at your next meeting about some of the changes. But I just want to let you know, as it relates to agencies and agency bills for the next session, that is the only one coming out of CJC for 27-29. And then just an update or a reminder about that next meeting. So we will be in Bend for our July meeting on the 7th. Looking forward to that. Commissioner Harris has set up a great itinerary where we'll get some exposure to their deflection program, their justice reinvestment programming, and as well as their stabilization center. So looking forward to that for those who can make it in person. And then we will hold our regular meeting at 1 o'clock. For those who are in person, we'll be in person. For those who are joining us hybrid, we will have that format. But I want to note today we extended the time for that meeting 30 minutes longer so that we could accommodate all the agenda items. So that meeting, whether you're in person or online, we're going to run from 1 until 3:30 to get through everything that we need to. And then lastly, just again, a reminder, if you are traveling to attend the meeting and need some arrangements made by Jenny, please let her know that if you haven't already. We need to know that information by the 12th so that we can set things up accordingly. That's all I have for you today.
Super, thanks, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? All right, I think that wraps it up. Good meeting, got through in short order, and we'll give you back 47 minutes of your day. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.